She went on a blind date with a man who had nothing. But behind his simple smile hid a secret worth millions. When the truth comes out, her love turns into heartbreak. Stay till the end, because this story proves not everything poor looks poor. Sophia had never liked blind dates. To her, they always felt awkward. A forced performance between two strangers pretending to be interested while counting the minutes until they could politely leave. But this time was different. Her best friend Maya wouldn't stop insisting. "Come on, Sophia," she said that morning over coffee. "You've spent the last 6 months working, sleeping, and watching the same crime documentaries. You need to meet someone normal." Sophia rolled her eyes, but couldn't help smiling. "Normal doesn't exist in this city," she replied. "Exactly why you need to give it one more try. My coworker knows this guy. Sweet, humble, hardworking. He's not some fake rich boy with a fancy car, just genuine." That last word lingered in Sophia's mind. Genuine. Maybe that was what she needed. Someone real, someone who didn't care about appearances or money. Against her better judgment, she agreed. "Fine, one date. If it's another disaster, you owe me dinner for a week." By evening, the city's lights were beginning to glow against the grey sky. Sophia stood outside a small cafe tucked between two old bookstores. It was quiet, nothing like the loud restaurants she usually avoided. She took a deep breath, smoothed her beige coat and stepped inside. The smell of roasted coffee and vanilla filled the air. Soft jazz played from a small speaker near the counter. She looked around, scanning the tables until she saw him. A man sitting alone in the corner, nervously stirring his drink. He looked up and smiled awkwardly. "Sophia?" She nodded, walking toward him. He stood up quickly, almost knocking over his chair. "Sorry," he said, laughing a little. "I'm not very good at this." He wore a faded grey jacket, a plain shirt, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. His hair was slightly messy, and his watch looked old, the kind people wear out of habit, not style. Still, there was something calm about his face, an honesty in his eyes that made her hesitate before judging him. "I guess neither of us are," she replied. Taking her seat, for the first few minutes, the silence between them was thick. Sophia sipped her coffee, pretending to check her phone, while he looked out the window. It felt like every other awkward date she'd been on, until he suddenly asked, "So, what do you love most about your job?" She blinked. "My job?" "Yeah," he said, smiling faintly. "Most people talk about what they hate about work." I figured I'd ask the opposite. That made her laugh. "I work in marketing. I guess I like telling stories, finding ways to make people feel something about a brand. It's strange, but I like it." He leaned forward, genuinely listening. "That's not strange at all. I think stories are what keep people alive." Something about the way he said that caught her attention. His voice was soft but steady, like someone who'd spent a long time thinking before speaking. For the first time in months, she found herself actually enjoying the conversation. They talked for hours about books, cities, family, dreams. She learned that his name was Ethan, that he'd grown up in a small town and recently moved here looking for a new start. He mentioned he was working on some business ideas but didn't say much more. Sophia noticed he avoided questions about his past. When she asked about his family, he simply said, "It's complicated," and changed the subject. Still, he was funny, warm, and had a quiet intelligence that made her curious. At one point, she laughed so hard she spilled a bit of coffee on the table. He quickly grabbed napkins, helping her clean up. "See," he said jokingly, "I'm already saving the day." She smiled. "Don't get too proud. It was just coffee." As the evening went on, the cafe grew quieter. The last of the customers left, and the waiter began wiping tables. Sophia realized they'd been talking for nearly 3 hours. When the bill arrived, Ethan reached for it immediately. "My treat," he said, but when he handed over his card, the waiter came back a minute later, frowning. "I'm sorry, sir. It's declined." Ethan's face flushed. "That's strange. I must have brought the wrong card." He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out another, but stopped halfway. "Actually, it's fine. I'll pay you back next time." Sophia looked at him, uncertain whether to laugh or feel sorry. She could tell he was embarrassed. His hands trembled slightly as he spoke. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'll get it." He hesitated, then nodded, giving a small, grateful smile. "You sure?" "I feel terrible. Don't worry. Just don't forget your wallet next time." He laughed quietly. "Deal." As they stepped outside, the night air was cool, filled with the scent of rain. They walked together toward the street, their footsteps echoing on the pavement. The city glowed around them, cars passing, neon signs flickering. Sophia didn't want to admit it, but she felt something strange. Comfort. "Thank you for coming," Ethan said as they reached the corner. "I know blind dates aren't your thing." "How do you know that?" He smiled. "You had that look when you walked in. The 'I can't believe I'm doing this' look." She laughed again. "You're not wrong." He looked at her then, really looked. "I had fun tonight," he said quietly. "You're easy to talk to." For a moment, neither of them said anything. The traffic light turned red, painting their faces in soft crimson. Sophia felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. But she brushed it away. "It was nice meeting you, Ethan," she said. "Take care." "You too, Sophia." As she walked away, she glanced back once. He was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her leave with a small smile. When she reached home, Maya called immediately. "So, was he handsome? Smart? Rich?" Sophia laughed. 2 out of 3, maybe. "But he's kind." "And real," Maya sounded surprised. "Real. That's a first." "I don't know," Sophia said, lying back on her couch. "He's not what I expected. Not my usual type, but he's different." She didn't tell Maya about the declined card or the old jacket. Somehow those things didn't seem to matter. As she fell asleep that night, her mind replayed fragments of their conversation, his gentle humor, his thoughtful pauses, the warmth in his voice. She wondered what kind of job he really had, what kind of life he came from. And far across the city, in a tall glass apartment overlooking the skyline, Ethan sat alone at his desk, staring at the same empty coffee cup he'd taken from the cafe. He smiled faintly, thinking of her laughter. In that moment, both of them, the tired marketer and the man with secrets, felt the same strange thought. Maybe this isn't just another date. Neither knew that their ordinary evening had just set the stage for a story that would test truth, love, and everything they thought they knew about each other. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of a massive skyscraper, reflecting off polished marble floors and chrome elevator doors. Employees hurried through the grand lobby of Blackwell Industries, holding coffee cups and files, greeting one another with nervous smiles. The air was filled with quiet anticipation. Their CEO was arriving. The security guards stood a little straighter as a tall man in a dark overcoat entered the building. He moved with quiet confidence, not arrogance, and yet everyone around him instinctively stepped aside. No one would have guessed that this was the same man who, just the night before, had been sitting in a modest cafe, pretending to be someone ordinary. "Good morning, Mr. Blackwell," said the receptionist with a respectful nod. Ethan returned a polite smile. "Good morning, Claire." He walked toward the private elevator reserved only for executives, his polished shoes clicking lightly against the marble. The mirrored walls reflected not just his calm expression, but also the faint weariness behind his eyes. As the elevator doors closed, he exhaled, loosening his tie. For a brief second, the charming but humble Ethan from last night returned, the one who didn't have to wear a mask of authority. When the doors opened on the top floor, his assistant Daniel was already waiting with a tablet in hand. "Morning, sir," Daniel said, matching his pace as they walked toward the office. "You've got a meeting with the board at 10, a call with the Paris investors at noon, and the media's still waiting for your official response to that merger proposal. Tell them they'll have it by tomorrow," Ethan replied calmly. Daniel hesitated before asking with a smirk, "So, how was the date?" Ethan glanced at him sideways but smiled slightly. "Better than I expected. That good, huh?" Daniel chuckled. "Should I start planning for wedding headlines? City's most eligible CEO finally taken?" Ethan laughed under his breath. "Don't push your luck." He entered his office, a massive room lined with bookshelves, abstract art, and a breathtaking view of the city skyline. The desk was spotless, except for a framed photo of his late parents. For a moment his eyes lingered on it. They had built this empire from nothing, and after their deaths he had doubled it in size. But along with success came loneliness. Money had surrounded him with people, but none who saw him for who he was. Investors saw his potential, employees saw his power, and women, most saw his wealth until last night. Sophia hadn't been impressed by anything he said. She hadn't even asked what he did for a living. When his card had been declined, she didn't mock him or walk away. She had smiled and paid like it didn't matter. It was a simple gesture, but to him, it felt like the first honest moment he'd had in years. He sat down in his leather chair and opened his laptop. The screen displayed financial graphs, partnership offers, and upcoming board meetings. The same endless list of responsibilities that defined his life. Yet his thoughts drifted back to her laughter. The way she had rolled her eyes when he joked about forgetting his wallet. He had told her he was working in an office. Technically true, but far from the whole truth. He hated lying, but he couldn't risk revealing who he was. Not yet. If she knew he was Ethan Blackwell, the CEO of one of the city's biggest corporations, everything would change. The warmth in her eyes would fade into the same cautious politeness he saw from everyone else. Daniel interrupted his thoughts by knocking lightly. "Sir, the board is ready." Ethan nodded and walked into the conference room. As he entered, the chatter stopped. The directors straightened their papers, their expressions switching to polite attention. "Good morning, everyone," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. They discussed market trends, expansion plans, and the potential risks of a new international project. Ethan listened carefully, but contributed sparingly, his mind drifting at moments. Halfway through the meeting, one of the directors, Mr. Langford, leaned forward. "Sir, I heard you've been taking some time off lately. Everything all right?" Ethan met his gaze, understanding the subtext. "If you're asking whether I'm distracted, don't worry. The company's in good hands," Langford chuckled nervously. "Of course, sir. I didn't mean—" "I know," Ethan said, cutting gently. "Let's continue." 2 hours later, when the meeting ended, Daniel followed him back to the office. "You were somewhere else during that meeting," he said cautiously. Ethan leaned against the desk. "Just thinking about her?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he asked, "Do you ever wonder if people would treat you differently if they didn't know what you do for a living?" Daniel smiled faintly. "All the time. But isn't that part of life?" "Everyone wears a mask," Ethan sighed. "Maybe, but I'm tired of mine." He looked out the window at the sprawling city below, cars moving like tiny dots, people rushing from one place to another, chasing dreams and money. He remembered sitting in that cafe last night, unnoticed, just another face in the crowd. For the first time in years, he'd felt free. He decided to keep seeing Sophia, but under one condition: she would continue knowing him as Ethan, the quiet man with a modest life. He wanted to see how far honesty could go without revealing the truth. That evening after his last meeting, he told Daniel to cancel his driver and left the building alone. The sun had set, and the city was alive with golden lights. He walked through the streets, blending in with the crowd. No one recognizing him, no photographers following, no investors calling. As he passed by a small florist, he stopped and bought a single white rose. The shopkeeper smiled. "For someone special?" Ethan smiled back. "Maybe." When he reached the cafe where he'd met Sophia, he looked through the window. She wasn't there, of course, but the empty corner where they had sat made him smile. He could still hear her laughter echoing faintly in his memory. He walked to the nearby park, sat on a bench, and thought about what to say the next time they met. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he wasn't poor, that he wasn't struggling. But something stopped him. What if she walked away the moment she found out who he was? What if she thought he had only played her for entertainment? He sighed, staring at the glowing city skyline. His phone buzzed. A message from Sophia. "Hey, just wanted to say thanks for the coffee last night. I had a great time. Maybe we can do it again sometime?" Ethan couldn't help but smile. He typed back, "I'd like that." As he hit send, he leaned back on the bench, looking up at the stars faintly visible between skyscrapers. For the first time in years, he felt something unfamiliar: excitement, hope, and maybe even fear. He had faced hostile takeovers, boardroom wars, and billion-dollar negotiations. None of those had made his heart race the way this one message did, because in the world of business, he always knew the rules. But in the world of love, especially one built on half-truths, he was stepping into unknown territory, and deep down, Ethan Blackwell, the man who had everything, knew that this might be the one game where power, money, and influence couldn't help him win. The next few weeks passed quietly, but something was changing between Sophia and Ethan. Their meetings became more frequent, sometimes planned, sometimes spontaneous. They met for coffee in little shops tucked between old streets, shared sandwiches on park benches, and spent long evenings walking along the riverside. It wasn't the kind of romance built on luxury or glamour. It was soft, slow, and strangely real. Every time Sophia saw Ethan, he looked almost the same. Simple jeans, a worn jacket, and those old shoes he never seemed to replace. He never bragged, never tried to impress her with fancy gestures. Instead, he listened. He remembered small things she said, like her favorite kind of pastry or how she hated noisy places. When she mentioned having a tough week, he showed up the next day with her favorite caramel latte and a handwritten note that simply said, "You're stronger than you think." For the first time in years, Sophia felt seen, truly seen. One evening, they sat in a park, watching the city lights shimmer on the water. Sophia, half laughing, half curious, asked, "Ethan, be honest, what do you really do for work?" "You never talk about it." He looked at her for a moment, thinking carefully before answering. "I work for a company, kind of behind the scenes. It's boring stuff, really. Numbers, meetings, nothing interesting." She tilted her head. "So, you're an accountant or something?" "Something like that," he said with a faint smile. She chuckled. "Mysterious and modest. What a combination." Ethan smiled back, but inside he felt a flicker of guilt. Every word he spoke carried a weight. It wasn't a total lie, but it wasn't the truth either. He told himself he wasn't ready to reveal who he really was. Not yet. He wanted to be sure she cared for him, not the name or the empire behind it. Sophia didn't push further. In her mind, he was just a regular man trying to make ends meet, maybe struggling a bit but good-hearted. And that was enough. Over time, she began to notice little details that didn't add up. He always seemed calm, never worried about bills or rent. Once she'd seen the watch on his wrist more closely. It looked old, yes, but the brand was expensive. Another time, when she asked where he lived, he'd said, "Oh, just a small place near downtown." But when she offered to visit, he'd quickly changed the subject. Still, she ignored her doubts. She told herself not everything needed an explanation. A few days later, she invited Ethan over for dinner. "You're always buying me coffee," she said. "Let me cook for once," he smiled. "You sure you trust me with your cooking?" "Just don't complain and you'll survive," she teased. That night she made pasta and lit a few candles in her small apartment. Ethan arrived on time, holding a bouquet of simple white lilies. Not expensive, not extravagant, but thoughtful. They ate, talked, and laughed, the evening passing effortlessly. After dinner, she asked again, softly, "Ethan, can I ask you something without you getting defensive?" He nodded. "Are you okay financially? You never talk about money, and I just worry sometimes." He leaned back, studying her face. "You could say things are tight," he said slowly, "but I'm fine. I don't want you to worry about that." "I'm not worried," she said quickly. I care. I want to make sure you're not pretending everything's okay if it's not." He smiled at her honesty. "You really are something else, you know that?" "What do you mean?" "Most people I meet would judge me for not having much." "You don't, you just care." She blushed slightly. "Well, I didn't fall for your wallet." Her words hit deeper than she realized. For a second, Ethan looked away, hiding the storm of emotion behind his calm smile. If only she knew, he thought. The next day, Sophia met her best friend Maya for lunch. Maya, as always, was skeptical. "So, Miss Secret Romance, when do I get to meet this mysterious man?" Sophia grinned. "Soon, but don't expect a rich prince." He's humble. Maya raised an eyebrow. Humble or broke? Maya, what? I'm just asking. You've worked so hard to get where you are. I don't want you dating someone who's pretending to be something he's not. Sophia sighed. He's not pretending. He's just private. That's what they all say, Maya muttered. Just promise me you'll be careful. Some guys are great actors. Sophia brushed it off. But Maya's words stuck with her. One Friday evening, Ethan told her he couldn't meet because he had some urgent office work. She didn't think much of it until the next day. She happened to pass through the part of town where he claimed to live. It was an old building, nothing fancy, so she decided to surprise him with his favorite coffee. But when she knocked on the door of the apartment number he'd given her, an old woman opened it. Yes? Sorry, I'm looking for Ethan Black. The woman frowned. There's no Ethan living here, dear. I've been here 15 years. You must have the wrong place. Sophia felt her stomach drop. Ah, okay. Sorry to bother you. She walked away, confused and hurt. Maybe he'd given her the wrong address by mistake. Or maybe he didn't trust her enough to tell her where he lived. The thought stung more than she expected. She tried calling him, but he didn't answer. Then she texted, once, twice, still no reply. By night, her emotions had twisted into a knot of confusion and anger. She sat on her couch, staring at her phone, replaying every moment they'd shared. Had she been fooled again? Hours later, a message finally came. Hey, sorry. Crazy day. Can we talk tomorrow? She didn't reply right away. Part of her wanted to believe him. Another part wanted to scream. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her thoughts spiraled. His vague job, the expensive watch, the empty apartment. Who was he really? The next day, she met him at their usual cafe. He smiled like nothing had happened, but she could see something behind his calm face. A tension, a secret. Ethan, she said quietly, I went to the address you gave me. His smile faded instantly. You, what? It was empty. Or rather, someone else lives there. Why would you lie about something like that? He hesitated, his mind racing. He couldn't tell her the truth, not yet. It's not what you think, he said carefully. I moved out recently. I must have given you the wrong address. Really, she said, her voice cold. Because it sounded like that woman's lived there for years. Sophia, please, he said, leaning forward. I didn't mean to hurt you. There are just things I can't explain right now. She looked into his eyes, searching for truth. For a long, heavy moment, neither spoke. Finally, she stood. I want to believe you, Ethan, I really do. But secrets always come out. She walked away before he could answer. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the table where her coffee cup still sat, half empty. His disguise, his plan to live simply, to find something real, it was starting to crumble. He had wanted her to love him for who he was inside. But he was learning that love built on lies, no matter how well-intentioned, couldn't survive forever. As he left the cafe, the weight of his double life pressed harder on him. For the first time, Ethan wasn't sure if he could keep pretending, or if he even deserved her trust anymore. The morning began like any other, quiet and unassuming. Sophia made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window, trying to distract her restless thoughts with work emails. But her mind kept circling back to Ethan, the unanswered questions, the strange lies, the way he had looked at her when she'd confronted him. Something wasn't right. She could feel it deep down, a gnawing instinct that wouldn't let her rest. Her phone buzzed. A notification popped up from a business news app she barely paid attention to. She was about to swipe it away when a name caught her eye. Ethan Blackwell. Her breath stopped. The headline read, Blackwell Industries CEO, Ethan Blackwell to host charity gala tonight. Her cup slipped from her hands, crashing onto the floor, spilling tea across the carpet. She didn't even notice. She just stared at the phone screen in disbelief. The picture in the article showed Ethan, in a suit, sharp and confident, standing beside city officials and celebrities. There was no mistaking him. Same eyes. Same calm smile. The man who had told her he was struggling, the man who wore the same old jacket and lived in a small apartment, was not poor at all. He was one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, For a few seconds, her mind refused to process it. She reread the headline over and over. Blackwell Industries CEO. She remembered the expensive watch, the vague job answers, the way he'd changed the topic every time she asked about his life. The truth had been there all along. She had just chosen not to see it. Her chest tightened. Why would he do this? She whispered to herself. Why pretend to be someone else? The betrayal hit her like a wave, sharp, cold, and humiliating. Every memory from the past weeks replayed in her mind. His laughter, his kindness, his quiet eyes. It had all felt so genuine. Was it all an act? Hours passed before she realized she'd been sitting there motionless, still holding her phone. Anger replaced the shock. She needed answers. She needed to hear from him. That evening, the city glowed with the shimmer of expensive cars and camera flashes as the charity gala began. The event was hosted at the Grand Avalon Hotel, an enormous glass building surrounded by red carpets and reporters. Sophia stood across the street, dressed simply, her heart pounding as she watched luxury vehicles pull up one after another. She wasn't supposed to be there, but something inside her wouldn't let her stay away. She needed to see him with her own eyes, to confirm the truth. From across the crowd she spotted him, Ethan, now fully transformed into someone she barely recognized. He wore a tailored black tuxedo, a silver tie-pin, and an expression of effortless authority. He smiled for the cameras, shook hands with politicians, and greeted journalists who called him Mr. Blackwell. Her stomach twisted. The humble, awkward man from the cafe was gone. In his place stood a stranger, powerful, composed, and surrounded by people who adored him. She felt foolish, standing there in her plain dress, invisible among the sea of diamonds and luxury. But when he turned slightly, his eyes swept across the crowd, and for one brief moment they met hers. His confident smile faltered. He froze, as if time itself had stopped. Sophia's gaze was cold, filled with questions and hurt. Without thinking, she stepped forward. The guards at the entrance hesitated, but before they could stop her, Ethan raised his hand. "It's okay," he told them quietly. He walked toward her, his polished shoes echoing on the marble floor. The crowd's chatter softened as people began to notice. Cameras turned. "Reporters sensed a story, Sophia," he said softly when he reached her. His voice was different, deeper, steadier, but still familiar. "So it's Ethan Blackwell now," she said, her tone sharp. "CEO of Blackwell Industries. Quite a promotion from the guy who worked in an office." He sighed, glancing around as whispers rippled through the room. "Please, not here. Let's talk privately." "No," she said firmly. "We'll talk right here, because I think the world should know who you really are. A liar who plays with people's trust." Her voice was louder than she intended, trembling with anger and pain. Guests nearby stopped talking, pretending not to stare. The flashes of cameras returned. Ethan stepped closer, his expression tense but gentle. "Sophia, I never meant to hurt you. You lied to me," she said, her voice cracking. "You made me believe you were struggling, that you were real, and the whole time you were living in a penthouse, running an empire, hiding behind this fake life." He swallowed hard. "You don't understand why I did it? Then explain," she said, tears filling her eyes. "Explain why you thought it was okay to play with someone's heart like that." He looked down for a moment, his voice quiet. "Because I wanted someone to see me. Not the money, not the name, just me. Every person who's ever come close to me wanted something. Business connections, favors, attention. I was tired of being a title. I wanted to know if someone could love me without any of that." Sophia stared at him, her breath uneven. "And so you decided to test me?" "It wasn't a test," he said quickly. "It started that way, maybe, but then I met you, and everything changed. You made me forget I was pretending. You made me wish I could stay that man forever." His words hung in the air, heavy and honest, but the hurt in her chest didn't fade. "You don't get to decide what's true or fake for someone else," she said. "You took away my choice to know who I was falling for." He stepped forward, his eyes pleading. "Sophia, please," she shook her head. "Don't. You lied to me once, and everything after that doesn't matter. You don't get to rewrite what happened. The room was silent now, filled with curious faces pretending not to eavesdrop. She turned to leave, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. Ethan stood there, motionless, watching her disappear through the glass doors. His chest felt hollow, his world suddenly quieter despite the noise of the gala resuming behind him. Daniel, his assistant, approached cautiously. "Sir, should I?" Ethan shook his head. "No, let her go." Outside, Sophia walked quickly down the marble steps, the cold air biting at her skin. Tears burned her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. Everything she had believed, every moment she thought was real, had turned into a performance. Behind her, inside the glittering hotel, Ethan stood alone among his guests. The cameras no longer mattered, nor did the investors waiting to shake his hand. All he could see was the door she had walked through, closing, like the truth he had hidden too long. Later that night, when the gala ended and the lights dimmed, Ethan went to his penthouse overlooking the city. The skyline glittered beneath him, cold and distant. He removed his jacket, loosened his tie, and sank into a chair. The silence pressed against him. The laughter from earlier felt like a memory from another life. He looked at his reflection in the window, the flawless suit, the powerful image, and for the first time, he hated it. He missed the simplicity of that cafe, her laughter echoing over the smell of coffee. He missed being Ethan, the man she had believed in. But now, the truth was out, and it had cost him the only person who ever saw him without the mask. Days turned into weeks, but the echo of that night at the gala wouldn't leave either of them. For Sophia, the city felt heavier, the air colder, the faces of strangers blending into a blur of noise and movement that no longer comforted her. Every cafe she passed reminded her of him, his quiet smile, the way he listened, the stories he told about trying to make it. Except now, every one of those moments felt poisoned by a lie. She tried to move on. She buried herself in work, filling her days with endless tasks so she wouldn't have to think. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. The expression on his face when she had walked away, the pain that almost looked genuine, that almost haunted her most. One evening, while cleaning out her phone gallery, she found a photo. One Ethan had taken of her laughing on the street, her hair flying in the wind. She remembered that day. It had rained suddenly, and he'd pulled her under a small shop canopy, joking that poor people like us can't afford pneumonia. She had laughed so hard that her stomach hurt. Now, looking at that picture, she felt tears slide down her cheeks. "You lied," she whispered to the screen. "But why does it still hurt to miss you?" Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Ethan was no longer the man the public adored. The press had praised his successful charity gala, but he had barely noticed. His life had become quiet, mechanical, and empty. Meetings blurred together, his signature scrawled across papers he didn't read. His assistants whispered that something was off. The CEO who used to command rooms now stared out windows instead. Daniel, his closest aide, finally confronted him one morning. "Sir, you've cancelled every social event for weeks. Investors are starting to worry." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Let them worry." Daniel hesitated. "Is this about her?" Ethan's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Daniel sighed softly. "You could try talking to her again. People make mistakes." Ethan looked at him, weary and lost. "She looked at me like I was a stranger. I can't fix that," but deep down, something in him refused to let go. He couldn't stop thinking about Sophia, her warmth, her honesty, her ability to make everything around her feel real. She had seen him for who he was before she knew his name, and now he felt like he'd lost that version of himself too. One afternoon, after a meeting, he found himself driving without knowing where he was going. When he stopped, he realized he had arrived at that same small cafe where they had first met. It was quieter now, almost empty. The same waitress was behind the counter, smiling politely. He sat in their old corner, his hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee he barely touched. The memories flooded back, her laughter, her teasing, her questions about his boring office job. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, one he had bought weeks before the truth had come out. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet, simple yet beautiful, with a small charm shaped like a compass. He had planned to give it to her and say, "No matter where we go, may we always find our way back." But now it felt like a cruel joke. He left money on the table and walked out, leaving the box behind. That evening the waitress found it. Thinking it was forgotten, she placed it aside, hoping the owner would return. The next day, Sophia walked into that same cafe for the first time since everything had happened. She hesitated at the door, her chest tightening with memories. But she needed closure. Maybe revisiting the place would help her move on. The waitress recognized her immediately. "You're the girl who used to come here with that quiet guy, right?" Sophia's lips pressed together. "Yeah, it's been a while." The waitress nodded sympathetically. "He was here yesterday. Looked like he hadn't slept in days." She then reached under the counter. "He left this. Maybe it's yours." Sophia frowned as she took the velvet box. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. When she saw the bracelet inside, her heart stopped. The compass charm shimmered faintly under the cafe lights. She didn't need a note to know what it meant. Her throat tightened as she whispered, "You idiot." That night she couldn't sleep. She kept staring at the bracelet, turning it over in her palm. She thought of his words, his reasons, the way he had looked when he said, "I just wanted someone to see me." She realized something painful but true. For all his lies, he had shown her pieces of himself no one else had seen. His laughter, his fear of being alone, his dreams of freedom from his family's empire. Maybe the man she had fallen for had always been real, just buried under the disguise of another life. The next morning, she made a decision. She took the train to the corporate district, her heart pounding as she stood outside the tall glass tower of Blackwell Industries. The receptionist tried to stop her, but when she said, "Tell him Sophia's here," there was no hesitation. Within minutes, Ethan appeared at the top of the lobby staircase. He looked stunned, as if afraid she might vanish again. Sophia stood still for a moment before walking toward him. The air between them was thick with everything left unsaid. "I found this," she said quietly, holding out the bracelet. He took a shaky breath. "I didn't think you would." She looked at him, really looked, and saw not the CEO in a suit, not the man from the tabloids, but the one who had once sat across from her in a small cafe. "Nervous and kind. You lied to me," she said softly. "But I also lied to myself. I wanted simple, real, honest. And maybe I forgot that everyone's carrying their own kind of disguise." He didn't speak. His eyes glistened, waiting. She sighed. "You hurt me, Ethan. You broke something I thought was unbreakable. But you also showed me something rare. You could have had anyone, yet you chose to live a truth that wasn't comfortable, just to feel normal. I can't hate you for that." He stepped closer, his voice trembling. "I never stopped thinking about you, Sophia, every day, every night. You made me remember what life feels like outside of glass walls and boardrooms." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe stop hiding behind them." For a long moment they stood in silence. The city's noise hummed outside, cars, voices, the world moving on. Finally, she held out the bracelet. "You gave this to me once, even if I didn't know it. Maybe it's time we both find our way back." He looked down at the charm, the tiny compass gleaming softly, and then at her. His voice broke when he said, "If you give me one more chance, I'll never lie again. Not about who I am, not about how I feel." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't from pain. "Then don't tell me," she whispered. "Show me." He nodded, his smile fragile but real. Outside, the rain began to fall, soft and steady, just like that first day. They stepped out together, laughing as the drops soaked their clothes. And as they walked down the crowded street side by side, it felt like the world was new again, imperfect, uncertain, but theirs. For the first time in a long while, Ethan wasn't the CEO, and Sophia wasn't the girl he'd deceived. They were just two souls who had finally found their way back, guided fittingly by a compass that had always pointed home. Love isn't about money, looks, or secrets. It's about truth. Ethan and Sophia's story reminds us that sometimes what's hidden tests what's real. Would you forgive someone who lied just to find true love? Tell us in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if it touched your heart. Because sometimes the richest people are those brave enough to love honestly.